Evening, everyone. Jamie Schramm, your instructor here for 790 for our fall 2025 semester. As I mentioned, I was going to put together a video discussing some of the highlights from our content as we weren't able to join together. What I'm going to do is I'm going to break this up. I'm going to talk about the managing organizational structure, and then we'll hold the culture part till we can be together next week. So a couple things to think about here. Some factors in determining your organizational structure. Certainly, the organizational environment that you operate within. What does your organization look like? What's the industry you're in? Obviously, your strategy. Strategy is always going to drive structure. Okay, structure does not drive strategy. You need to decide your strategy and then put a structure in place that you can execute that strategy. Certainly, technology can play a role in what the structure looks like, right? Where are people located? Remote work, in-person work, a combination of both. How does technology connect people, right? And then the human resources piece, right? HR strategy is important, and that can also determine structure, your overall, what you're trying to achieve there. Some of what they talk about, a very functional structure. Like you have different departments, different teams. You have a accounting department, sales department, operations department, right? In that kind of situation, right, it's all about efficiency, probably low cost leaders. We think of that business level strategy. Decisions probably somewhat pre-programmed. You kind of know what they're going to be like. There might be some, decisions that you can kind of, if A, then B, and it's pretty well structured. Whereas, as you get more into the divisional structure and even the horizontal teams, and I know sometimes horizontal teams are seen as like the panacea of everything, but they're not always the right structure, right? There's no one right way to structure your organization. There's probably a one or two better ways based on the strategy you're trying to implement. So the horizontal teams, right? That's much more non pre-programmed decisions, a lot of fluidity, a lot of empowerment kind of thing, differentiation, innovation, flexibility is really the key name of the game, right? Fast-paced external environment requires a more flexible structure. A more stable-paced environment might allow for more defined hierarchy. Most industries now are moving at a pretty good pace. Now, some of them definitely are moving right much relatively slower than others, but even relatively slower, most organizations and industries are moving pretty quickly. Strategy. So our overall, we look at our strategy and how that can influence our structure, right? If there's a high level of customer service, what does that differentiation look like? If it's a low cost leader, what does that look like? And what kind of integration or diversification are we trying to implement? So strategy's influence on structure, right, is significant, and then it also works the other way. Technology, right, can play a role on structure. Is there a lot of technology introduces a lot of task variety where we don't know what's going to happen, new problems, first time problems, right? There's not a lot of pre-programmed decisions that are available, right? So if a task has a high degree of analyzability, that means we can kind of put together a pretty scripted response to issues that might arise because we know the issues and we know the response. But technology, especially new technologies and emerging technologies, right? We don't necessarily know what's going to happen. Once they work great. But there's always going to be a set of new and unexpected problems that we're not ready for, right? Certain HR strategy plays a role in determining our strategy. Human resources, right? Do we need high skilled, low skilled? Do we need people who might be not a lot of technical skill, but they really need to be living the values and ethics of the organization, right? So what do those positions look like? Becomes really important. The one risk of a functional strategy is that silo mentality, right? Where it becomes very difficult for a peer in marketing to talk to a peer in accounting, to talk to a peer in operations, right? You have to go up your silo and then over. And communication, we've all played the telephone game. We kind of know how that works. It doesn't always work so well. So a functional strategy can really create silos where communication becomes difficult. We don't maybe see how other teams or other departments are adding value. Easy to lose sight of the bigger picture sometimes, and just get stuck within our functional operations. So Patrick Lencioni wrote a great book called Silos, Politics, and Turf Wars, and he said one of the ways to overcome or to minimize the risks of a silo strategy is to create just enough urgency in our organizations. Not that we, stress people out, but just enough urgency that there's not time for politics and not time for any sort of dysfunctional type behavior or poor games in our organization, right? And what he says is, he kind of had this aha moment when he went to the doctor. He goes, if you go to a doctor, your primary care physician, a lot of good, hardworking, well-intentioned people, but he said, your information is confirmed 3 or 4 different times. It's passed on half a dozen times. And after your information is repeated multiple times and then passed on, right, there's tons of handoffs. You finally get to see, the doctor. And usually after you see a nurse or somebody first, and 40, 45 minutes have gone by. He said, if I walk into an ER room, right? If I walk into the ER and I say, hey, I'm a middle-aged 55-year-old man, I have a little bit of high blood pressure, I'm having tingling in my right arm or left arm, right? We're not going to get the million questions confirming the data. We might get some basic information, and they're going to pretty much take care of you. Why? Because there's a sense of urgency in that second situation in that ER room, where there's a little bit less urgency maybe in a regular primary care physician's office. He said, can we create just enough urgency, right, that we don't have to have 6 handoffs and confirm our information 5 times, right? He said, it doesn't necessarily need to be a matter of life or death. We don't need to stress people out, but can we create just enough urgency, just enough of a rallying cry, and surround it with our values of who we are and what we are as an organization. Then they talk about some other structures, divisional structures. So there's, product structures, market structures, geographic structures. So sometimes we align people by product, right? Which is very popular, right? It allows us to focus in one area. It allows us to become our business level strategy, really to become in tune with our customers. And it frees the corporate managers to take a large 50,000 foot strategic view, right? And it kind of allows some expertise on that business level strategy, and it allows, like I said, senior managers to focus more on the corporate level strategy. That's a benefit of the product level. Geographic kind of strategy or structure, right? Our products and services are delivered based on geography, right? So like lawn care, right? We're not selling a lot of lawnmowers right now in Wisconsin, probably in October, November. We're starting to sell snowblowers. We're not selling snowblowers down in southern Texas, really ever, right? So lawn and garden and outdoor equipment kind of have that geographic feel to them. A market structure, right, or called a customer structure. That's where, based on the needs of a particular customer, not a product, but on the customer, right, is how we align ourselves. And then you talk about a matrix structure. So a matrix structure, you could have multiple inputs to your priorities, right? You could have a functional boss, like an engineering boss, but you could also have like a product A or a product B team if you're on a product or project team. Works as well. So all different sorts of structures. They talk about a product team structure, right? So a product team structure, you might have all different functions represented on that product team. So in team A might handle like all low volume, high customization, right? Low volume, high customization. Team B maybe handles all high volume, low customization, almost like commodity items, right? And then you have all your different functions represented on team A and team B. They just serve certain products or certain types of customers, right? Certain demographics. So a few things just to think about as we get into that. The virtual network structure, that's a little different than what it used to be. And the word virtual means something kind of a little different nowadays. But it really talks about, do we centralize the hub of like billing and some functions and then subcontract out? There are some companies that tried doing this back in the day. Newell Rubbermaid tried doing this. They bought Miro Corporation in Manitowoc. What happens is you get brain drain. It doesn't really work so well. All your technical knowledge and your innovation and your emerging technologies and emerging industry knowledge is with your subcontractors, and you really don't maintain that in your central hub. This is kind of what got Dell into trouble, Dell Computers, right? You remember what Dell's kind of original thing was, for those of you that might remember back in the day. Dell, you could go online and order a computer and you could customize it, right? And back in the day, if you wanted to customize your desktop, it used to cost you a ton of money, right? Well, Dell had 4 or 5 different models. Some had a ton of RAM, some had a better video card, some had better sound card, or they would feature 2 out of 3, but you wouldn't necessarily get all 3, so you would have to pay high-end premium computer prices. And you could kind of customize it to what you needed if you were doing more web surfing, if you're doing more video editing and stuff like that. So you could kind of customize it that way. And they didn't necessarily charge you an arm and a leg, and then they would ship it to you, okay? Well, all Dell was doing is assembling everyone else's technology in a unique way. Let me repeat that. All Dell was doing was essentially taking the order and assembling everyone else's technology in a unique way. Dell didn't create the motherboard. Dell didn't create the RAM. Dell didn't create the CPU or that Intel processor, right, or that AMD processor. They were just taking that and assembling it kind of in a unique way that no one else was doing, right, and taking orders online. Very easy strategy to imitate, number one. Number two, the other problem was because they weren't developing the technology and doing the R&D, when the market shifted from desktops to laptops to eventually mobile, Dell never really caught up, right? Dell doesn't have a cell phone offering, right? So they were kind of lost behind because they weren't actually creating the technology or doing the R&D behind the technology. They didn't have the industry knowledge of the technology. They were taking everyone else's technology and just assembling it in a unique way. And then, of course, you talk about a hybrid structure. Hybrid structure, organizations might have several different structures based on who they're serving, where they're located, what their division does. They could have a structure that ebbs and flows a little bit, right? Maybe during uncertain economic times it looks one way, maybe during other times, right, it looks another way. Ways might have a structure that they adapt to react to external forces. And really, what that hybrid structure allows is flexibility and agility. And we know that flexibility and agility allow business organizations to win, right? Business organizations, for profit, nonprofit, really any organization to win when they have flexibility and agility. So with that, just wanted to take a look at the structure side of things. We'll be back together next Monday. We'll dive in. We'll look at the organizational culture piece, because I'd rather do that when we can be back in person. Again, remember, I moved case studies back. You have it now until November 10th to finish all your case studies. Hope this helps us. Look, as always, if you have to reach out, if you need anything, do not hesitate to reach out and get in contact with me. Thank you so much.